"Give me the gun, sweetheart, before you hurt yourself." Sergeant Dolan ripped the rifle from Emily's hands in front of the entire mess hall, slammed it onto the table, then grabbed her collar and shoved her backward into the serving counter so hard the metal edge cut into her spine. "Cooks don't touch weapons," he said. "Cooks don't talk tactics. Cooks shut up and make breakfast." 20 Navy SEALs watched. Not one of them moved. Emily straightened, said nothing. But her eyes went to the mountains, because she already knew something none of those men knew. Before morning, she would need that rifle, and nobody was going to stop her from taking it. Before we go any further, if this story moves, you subscribe to this channel and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. She had been at Forward Operating Base Kestrel for 11 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. Not that anyone was counting, certainly not the SEALs. Emily Carter knew the exact number because she had scratched a small mark into the inside wall of her footlocker every single morning when she woke up before anyone else on the base. It was the first thing she did before she started the coffee, before she fired up the industrial burners, before she hauled in the supply crates that were always delivered to the wrong section of the compound and somehow always ended up being her problem to sort out. 367 marks. 367 mornings of invisibility. She was 26 years old, 5 feet 4 inches tall, with dark hair she kept in a tight braid that tucked against the back of her neck. She had brown eyes that most people never looked directly into because most people never looked directly at her at all. She had a small scar along her left jawline from a ricochet training accident when she was 14 years old, and her grandfather had cleaned the wound himself with antiseptic and steady hands and told her afterward, very quietly, that the scar was proof she had already survived something most people never face. "Remember that," he had said, "every time someone tells you that you don't belong somewhere." She remembered it every single day at FOB Kestrel. The base sat inside a valley ringed by rocky mountains in a province most Americans couldn't find on a map. It housed 42 personnel at full strength, a rotating SEAL team that came and went, support staff, communications, specialists, a medical unit of 3, and Emily. The compound had thick blast walls, a motor pool, a communications shed, a medical bay that smelled like antiseptic and anxiety, and a mess hall that Emily ran alone. She woke at 4:30 every morning. She cooked breakfast for people who called her the girl or the cook, or sometimes when they were feeling particularly creative, Beatty Crocker. She cleaned, she restocked, she maintained the inventory. She submitted supply requests that were consistently ignored until someone important complained that the coffee was running low, and then suddenly the paperwork she had already filed 3 weeks prior was processed in 48 hours. She did not complain. She did not report the comments. And every evening after the last dish was cleaned and the kitchen was locked down, Emily went back to her bunk, retrieved the worn leather journal her grandfather had given her, and wrote down everything she had observed that day. Not personal feelings, observations, wind patterns from the northeast ridge, the way sound traveled differently when the temperature dropped below 40 degrees, the schedule irregularities in the patrol rotations, the blind spot in the northwest corner of the outer wall where the camera had been misaligned for 6 weeks and nobody had fixed it, the shadows on the mountain tree line that sometimes moved in ways that didn't match the wind. She had mentioned the camera to Sergeant First Class Dolan twice. Once in writing, once in person. Dolan had looked at her the way men like him always looked at women like Emily, not with hostility exactly, but with something worse. A kind of casual dismissal that doesn't even bother to be cruel because it doesn't consider the dismissed person significant enough to warrant the effort. "I'll pass it up the chain," he had said, and gone back to his card game. The camera was still misaligned. The mess hall was the social center of the base, which meant it was the place Emily understood best and was treated worst. She knew their orders before they gave them. She knew Petty Officer Marcus Webb took his coffee black with 2 sugars and always said just black to seem tough before quietly adding the sugars when he thought no one was watching. She knew Lieutenant Commander Patrick Reeves ate his eggs, scrambled hard on days when he was stressed, and soft on days when he had slept well. And based on his eggs, she could tell you more about the operational mood of the unit than most of the briefings he gave. She knew Corpsman Danny Okafor was the only person on the base who said thank you to her with any consistency, and that he did it quietly, like he was slightly embarrassed to be the only one doing it. She knew who was sleeping badly. She knew who had gotten a hard letter from home. She knew when the team was going out that night because of the way they loaded their plates slower, heavier, like men eating against uncertainty. Emily Carter knew everything about everyone at FOB Kestrel. Nobody knew anything about Emily Carter. This was she understood an advantage. Her grandfather Walter had taught her that before he taught her anything else about being a sniper. Before the fundamentals of marksmanship, before the physics of long-range shooting, before the patience training that turned a restless 12-year-old girl into something that could hold perfectly still for 4 hours in a field without making a sound. Before all of that, he had sat across from her at the small kitchen table in his farmhouse in rural Montana and told her the first principle of his craft. People ignore what they think they understand, he had said. The moment someone decides they know what you are, they stop looking at you. They stop thinking about you. You become furniture to them. In furniture, Emily can go anywhere in a room. Furniture sees everything. And furniture, when the time comes, can be the last thing someone sees. He had a way of saying serious things in a voice that sounded almost cheerful. It had unnerved her as a child. It had comforted her as an adult. Walter Carter had served 3 tours in Vietnam with a Marine Scout sniper unit before anyone officially called them that. He had 23 confirmed kills, a Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Purple Hearts, and a profound suspicion of military bureaucracy that he had never quite shaken. He had come home to Montana, married a woman named Ruth who taught mathematics, and was the only person alive who could reliably beat him at chess. Raised 2 daughters, buried his wife after 31 years. And then when his oldest daughter's marriage fell apart, and she brought her young daughter Emily to live with him for what turned into 6 years, Walter Carter had done what he had always done with the things he loved best. He had taught them the things that kept you alive, not because he thought Emily would become a soldier. He didn't plan it. But she was curious, and she was patient, and she had an instinct for stillness that he recognized, the same quality that had made him the best shot in his unit, the ability to exist in the present moment so completely that past and future simply fell away. He had started with fundamentals, basic marksmanship at 100 yards, breath control, the relationship between trigger pressure and point of impact, how to read wind, how to read distance, how to make the calculations that turned an act of violence into an act of precision. He had not made it easy. He had not been particularly gentle. He had held her to a standard that other instructors would have called unreasonable for an adult, let alone a 13-year-old girl. This isn't about shooting, he told her once, after she had missed a target at 500 yards for the 4th time in a row and was fighting tears she refused to let him see. Shooting is just the last 3%. The other 97% is everything that happens before you pull the trigger. And most people, he said, quit somewhere in that 97%. That's where wars are won and lost. Not at the trigger, in the mind. She had not quit. By the time she was 16, she could hit a man-sized target at 1,000 yards with enough consistency to make her grandfather stop watching through his own scope and just watch her instead. "You're better than I was at your age," he told her. He paused. "You might be better than I ever was." She had not known what to do with that, so she had said nothing. He had smiled. "Good," he said. "The best ones never know how good they are. The ones who know get lazy. The ones who don't know keep working." She kept working. She had enlisted at 22, not because she wanted to be a soldier in any conventional sense, but because she had a degree in logistics and nutrition science that wasn't going to pay off her student debt, waiting tables, and billings. And because a recruiter had talked to her for 40 minutes about opportunities in food service and support roles that came with housing and a steady income and the chance to travel. She had not mentioned her grandfather. She had not mentioned the rifle. She had passed her basic training at the top of her platoon in physical fitness and near the top in everything else. Her marksmanship scores had been exceptional enough that her basic training sergeant had called her aside and asked if she had previous experience. Some, she had said, some he had repeated, looking at the targets. Right. She had been assigned to food service. Not because her scores indicated she was best suited for it, but because the system sorted people into roles based on a combination of their enlistment agreement, available openings, and though no official document would ever state this plainly, the assumptions that officers made about young women who listed nutrition science as their degree. She had not fought it. She had remembered what her grandfather said about furniture. She had gone where they sent her, and she had brought the rifle. Walter's old Remington 700, customized over decades with a heavy barrel, a Night Force scope, and a stock he had shaped himself from walnut wood. The rifle was not issued equipment. It was not registered in any military inventory. It lived at the bottom of her foot locker in a case that looked from the outside like it contained a collapsible field cot. She cleaned it every 3 days. She did not fire it. She waited. The day that changed everything started like every other day. 4:30 in the morning. Emily's alarm went off. She reached over and silenced it before it could disturb the 2 other women in the barracks, Specialist Tran from communications and Private Holloway from the motor pool, both of whom were still asleep, and both of whom she knew had been up late, dealing with a satellite relay problem that had taken 6 hours to diagnose and fix. She dressed in the dark from memory, boots, pants, thermal layer jacket. She pulled her hair back without looking in a mirror. She had not needed a mirror for this routine in almost a year. She walked to the mess hall. She started the coffee. She pulled the supply inventory from the previous night and began calculating what she needed to prepare for the day. 28 personnel currently on base. The main patrol element, Lieutenant Commander Reeves, and 19 SEALs was scheduled to depart at 1800 hours for a 3-day operation in the Northern Valley. That meant tonight's dinner was important. High calorie, high protein, the kind of meal that landed in the body like fuel because those men were going to need it. She was halfway through the breakfast prep when she stopped. She set down the ladle she was holding. She walked to the mess hall's north-facing window, the one that looked toward the mountain ridge 3 kilometers out, and she stood there for a long moment, perfectly still, looking at nothing that anyone else would have noticed. The light was wrong. Not dramatically wrong, not wrong in any way that would have registered to most people. But Emily had been watching that ridge for 11 months from every window and every angle available to her, and the shadow distribution along the eastern face of the third peak was not consistent with the cloud cover above it. Shadows don't contradict their sources unless something beneath them is moving. She stood at the window for 4 minutes. She counted at least 11 separate instances of shadow displacement. She went to find Sergeant Dolan. She found him in the communications shed drinking coffee and talking to Specialist Tran about the satellite relay issue. He looked up when she came in, and the look on his face was the look she had learned to expect: mild irritation at the interruption, the preformed dismissal already assembling itself behind his eyes. "Carter," he said, "little early for a snack run." "Sergeant," she said, keeping her voice completely flat, "I need you to look at something. I'm a little busy here." "The eastern ridge," she said. "The shadow pattern on the third peak doesn't match current cloud cover. I've been tracking it for 4 minutes, and I'm seeing movement consistent with at least a squad-sized element concealing in the rocks above the 2,000-meter line." Dolan stared at her. Tran looked up from her equipment. "You've been watching the ridge," Dolan said slowly from the mess hall window. "Yes, Sergeant. While making breakfast. The window faces north. I can see the third peak from the Carter." He set down his coffee. "I appreciate the enthusiasm, I really do. But shadow reading from a kitchen window isn't exactly our intelligence methodology here, all right? We have satellites, we have drones, we have people whose actual job is threat assessment. The camera on the northwest corner has been misaligned for 6 weeks," she said. "There's a blind corridor along the base of the third ridge that our current surveillance doesn't cover." Something shifted in Dolan's face. Not belief, something more like the discomfort of a man who doesn't want to acknowledge that the furniture might have a point. "I'll pass it up the chain," he said. "You said that about the camera," Emily said. The silence in the shed was absolute. Tran suddenly became very interested in her equipment. Dolan stood up slowly. He was 6'2", broad-shouldered, decorated, and experienced, and he looked down at Emily with an expression that was no longer dismissal, but was now something with edges on it. "Is that right?" he said quietly. "I documented both reports," Emily said. "They're in the maintenance log. The camera issue was first flagged on March 14th. Today is—" "I know what day it is, Carter." "Then you know the camera has been misaligned for 41 days, she said. "And I'm telling you that there are people in those rocks." He held her gaze for a long moment. She did not look away. "I'll have Martinez do a pass with the drone in the next rotation window," he said finally. 2 hours. Satisfied? "No," she said. She said it so simply and so flatly that Dolan actually blinked. "The patrol departs at 1800, she said. "If there are forward elements establishing a targeting position on that ridge, now they're doing it because someone told them our patrol schedule. They'll want the gate at its lowest strength. The window before the patrol leaves is the worst possible time to have incomplete surveillance coverage. Dolan opened his mouth, closed it. He looked at Tran again as if a second opinion from someone operating radio equipment might validate his dismissal. Tran said nothing and remained extremely focused on her screen. 2 hours, Dolan said. I'll get you your drone pass. Emily looked at him for one more second. Yes, Sergeant, she said, and she went back to make breakfast. The drone pass 2 hours later showed nothing. Emily received this information from Dolan directly. He found her in the mess hall laying out the lunch prep and delivered the report with a kind of controlled satisfaction that didn't bother to hide itself very well. Clean scan, he said. No heat signatures, no movement, no nothing. So, maybe next time you spot an invasion force from the breakfast window, we wait for actual intelligence before raising the alarm. Yeah. Emily did not respond. She was looking at the drone footage results he had handed her on the tablet. What time was the scan window? She asked. Excuse me. The drone pass, what time did it execute? Dolan took the tablet back. 0940 to 0953. 90 minutes after I reported the movement, Emily said. Yes, Carter. It takes time to... And the scan altitude. He stopped. Standard patrol altitude? He said slightly slower now. 800 meters AGL. The movement I observed was at the 2,000-meter line, she said. Above the thermal inversion layer. At 0940, the temperature differential between the rock face and the ambient air at that altitude would have suppressed heat signatures by approximately 40%. The drone's thermal sensors aren't calibrated for high-altitude suppression at standard patrol settings. The silence was different this time. Dolan was looking at her the way people look at something they suddenly cannot quite categorize. Where did you learn about thermal inversion effects on drone sensors? He said. I read the equipment manuals, Emily said. I've read all the equipment manuals. There isn't much else to read out here. He stared at her. The patrol, she said carefully. I would just ask that you consider a modified departure or additional watch on the north perimeter before... The patrol is a go, he said. As planned, intel is clean. He walked out. Emily watched him leave. She set down the serving spoon she was holding. She walked back to her barracks. She opened her footlocker. She looked at the rifle case for a long moment. She did not take it out. Not yet. She closed the footlocker and she went back to the kitchen and she made dinner for 28 people who did not know that the most dangerous person on their base was plating their food and watching the mountains and counting the hours. At 1800 hours, Lieutenant Commander Reeves led 19 men through the main gate into the fading Afghan evening. Emily watched from the mess hall window. She watched until the dust from their vehicles disappeared behind the first ridge turn. Then she walked to the window facing north. The shadows were different now, tighter, more distributed across the face of the mountain in a pattern that meant concealment had become positioning. They weren't hiding anymore. They were moving into place. She stood at that window for a long time. Around her, the reduced base crew went through their evening routines, 6 SEALs who had remained behind as security, the medical team of 3 Tran and Holloway Dolan, and 4 other support personnel. 17 people total, 17 people in a compound designed for 42 with a misaligned camera, an incomplete surveillance corridor, and mountains full of men who knew exactly when the gates would be at their thinnest. Emily went to her barracks. She unlocked the footlocker. She opened the case. The Remington 700 lay inside, broken down into its components, each piece wrapped in a soft cloth and nested in custom foam that her grandfather had cut himself. She had not fired it in 11 months. She had cleaned it every 3 days. She had made adjustments for the altitude and the ambient temperature and the atmospheric pressure at FOB Kestrel's elevation, working the calculations the same way her grandfather had taught her by hand in the leather journal. Late at night when the barracks was quiet, she did not assemble it. She sat on the edge of her bunk. She thought about Dolan's face when he told her the intel was clean. She thought about the shadows on the mountain. She thought about her grandfather sitting across from her at a small kitchen table in Montana, hands wrapped around a coffee mug, telling her with the quiet certainty of a man who has survived enough truth to know it when he sees it. There will be a moment, Emily. There will be a moment when you are the only one who sees it clearly, and every voice around you will tell you you're wrong. Every system will fail. Every authority will dismiss you. And in that moment, the whole weight of the decision will fall on you alone, not on them, on you. She had been 12 years old. She had asked him what you did in that moment. He had looked at her over his coffee mug with those steady blue eyes. You trust what you know, he said. Not what you hope, not what they tell you, what you know. Emily sat on the edge of her bunk. She knew what she knew. Outside, the Afghan night settled over the mountains like a held breath. 3 kilometers away in the rocks above the 2,000-meter line, men moved into position who had been waiting a long time for this particular darkness. And in a barracks at the center of a forgotten outpost, a woman the military had classified as a cook reached into a foam-lined case and began assembling a rifle with hands that did not tremble. She worked from memory. She worked in silence. When the rifle was assembled, she checked the scope adjusted for the night's wind reading, 11 knots from the northeast, colder than the day had suggested, and laid it carefully across the bunk beside her. She opened her journal to the last page of calculations she had written. She checked them twice. She closed the journal. She sat in the dark, perfectly still, and she waited. Because the one thing Walter Carter had taught her, above everything else, above marksmanship and wind reading and thermal inversion effects and the patience required to hold a position for 4 hours without moving, the one thing he had returned to again and again across 6 years of quiet Montana evenings was this: the shot doesn't make the sniper. The waiting does. And Emily Carter had been waiting for this moment for 11 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. She was ready. At 3:47 in the morning, the first mortar round hit the north perimeter wall. The explosion tore through the darkness so violently that the pressure wave rattled the windows in their frames clear across the compound. Then the second round hit. Then the third. Then the machine guns opened up from 3 separate positions along the ridge, and FOB Kestrel went from sleeping silence to a combat situation that had no good options in the space of about 11 seconds. Emily was already moving. She had the rifle in her hands. She was already running for the roof access door before the echo of the first explosion finished rolling back from the mountains. She hit the door at the end of the barracks corridor, with her shoulder took the stairs up to the roof access hatch 2 at a time, and came out into the cold Afghan night with her rifle up and her eyes scanning the ridgeline. Below her, she could hear shouting. The SEALs were responding. She could hear Dolan's voice cutting through the chaos, directing fire teams calling for status from the gate. The quality of their response was good, professional. These were trained men doing exactly what they had been trained to do. But there was a voice on that ridge that was already doing more damage than the SEALs could see. Through her scope, in the ambient light of a half moon and the burning glow of the impact fires, Emily swept the eastern face of the third peak. 700 yards, 800. She found him at 720. He was good, professionally positioned in a natural rock feature that gave him cover from below in a clean line of sight down into the compound. He was using a suppressed weapon. She could see the muzzle flash suppressor on his barrel, which was why the SEALs below couldn't locate his position. He had already taken down 2 people in the compound. She could see them down. She didn't let herself look at them for more than a second. She aligned her shot, controlled her breath, and her grandfather's voice clear and quiet as it had ever been said to her across 15 years. The most dangerous weapon in the world is the one nobody sees coming. Emily fired. The shot went wide. She knew at the instant the trigger broke. A microflinch, the first live shot she had taken in 11 months. The first shot she had ever taken at a human being, and her body had betrayed her in the final microsecond with a contraction in her right shoulder that pulled the round 3 inches left of center at 700 yards. The enemy sniper's head came up. He had heard the shot. He was turning, finding her position. Emily worked the bolt, breathed out, breathed in halfway, let half of that go. She remembered the wind, 11 knots northeast. She compensated. She remembered the elevation drop, 720 yards downhill angle -4 degrees. She remembered her grandfather's hands over hers on a rifle she had been too small to hold properly, his voice patient and firm and absolutely certain. Don't aim at the target, he had told her. Aim at the space between you and the target. You're not controlling the bullet, you're controlling the air. The enemy sniper was raising his weapon toward the rooftop. Emily controlled the air. She fired, and the ridge was quiet. She worked the bolt again, already moving her scope, already looking for the next problem, because there was always a next problem, because that was what her grandfather had told her too. The hardest shot isn't the first one. The hardest shot is the one right after the first one when your hands want to shake with relief and you have to tell them this isn't over yet. Below her, the assault continued, and Emily Carter, the cook, no one had ever seen, settled into her position on the rooftop of FOB Kestrel and went to work. The second shot changed everything. Not because it killed the enemy's sniper. Emily had known it would. The moment she fired it, the calculation was clean. The wind compensation was correct. The trigger brake was smooth in a way the first one had not been. She had known the round would find its target before the sound of the shot finished echoing off the mountain face. What changed everything was what happened 30 seconds later. Below her on the compound floor, she heard Dolan's voice cut through the firefight with the particular sharpness of a man who has just lost his mental model of a situation. "What the hell? Who is shooting from the roof? Martinez, do you have a man on the roof who authorized a position on the roof?" Nobody answered him because nobody knew. Emily was already moving her scope. 700 yards out on the ridge, the enemy assault had not stopped. It had reorganized. The loss of their sniper had created a gap in their fire coordination, maybe 45 seconds of confusion while the unit commanders recalibrated. Emily had used those 45 seconds to find the next problem, and the next problem was a two-man RPG team working their way down the eastern slope toward an angle that would give them a clear shot at the medical bay. She did not have 45 more seconds. She fired once. The lead man went down. The second man dropped the launcher and pulled back behind the rocks. 2 shots from the roof, she heard someone shout below. 2 down on the east slope. Someone on the roof is there picking off the RPG teams. "Who is on that roof?" Dolan again louder. Emily worked the bolt without looking away from her scope. She had already found the next problem. There was a machine gun position that had been set up along the natural rock shelf at roughly the 900-yard line, positioned specifically to suppress the main gate and keep the SEALs pinned inside the compound. As long as that gun was active, nobody could move, nobody could reinforce the perimeter, and the assault teams working the west wall had a free approach window. She could see 3 men at the position. One on the gun, one feeding the belt, one spotting. 940 yards. Uphill angle. Wind still 11 knots from the northeast, but with a variable gust pattern she had been tracking for the last 3 minutes. The gusts were coming in 6-second intervals, which meant she had a clean window every 6 seconds between gusts where the wind was holding steady. She waited for the gust to pass. She counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She fired on 6 before the next gust arrived. The gunner went down. The feed man grabbed the weapon. Emily worked the bolt. Waited 4 seconds. The gust came, the gust passed, and fired again. The feed man went down. The third man ran. The machine gun went silent. And from somewhere below her, she heard the compound erupt. "The gun's down. The gun on the north ridge is down. We can move. Go, go, go." She heard boots on concrete. She heard the SEALs pushing out from their pinned positions toward the perimeter walls, taking advantage of the window she had just opened for them. She heard Corpsman Okafor's voice, Danny, who always said thank you, calling for someone to help him get the wounded away from the exposed section near the east wall. She did not look down. She kept her eye on the scope. Because the machine gun was one problem, and she had counted at least 11 position changes on the ridge since the assault began, and she did not know yet where all of them were. Then Dolan's voice came from directly below her. "Carter." She did not respond. "Carter, I know that's you up there. I can see your braid from here." She fired a shot at a muzzle flash she had spotted moving along the lower ridgeline. Watch the flash go dark. "Carter, you need to come down from there right now. That is a direct order. You are support staff, and you are in an unauthorized combat position, and you need to be a Dolan." Her voice was flat, completely flat, the same voice she had used when she told him about the shadows on the mountain. "There are 2 assault teams on the west wall. They're going to breach the medical bay in approximately 8 minutes. I need you to reinforce the west wall right now." Silence. "How do you know that?" "Because I've been watching them move for the last 12 minutes. West wall, 8 minutes. Go." Another silence. Shorter. "How many?" 6 on the primary team. 4 more in support covering from the low ridge. I'll handle the support element. You need bodies on that wall." She heard him breathe. She heard the particular sound of a man recalculating everything he thought he knew about a situation. "Carter, 7 minutes and 40 seconds. Sergeant." She heard him go. She was already moving her scope toward the low ridge. The four-man support element was spread across a 40-meter front, using the natural rock formations as individual cover positions. They were good professional spacing, proper interval, the kind of tactical placement that meant someone in that unit had real training. She gave them that acknowledgement internally the way her grandfather had taught her to respect a difficult shot without letting the respect slow you down. She started with the man on the far right, the reason you always start at one end and work toward the other. Walter had explained to her once on a cold Montana morning, with frost still on the grass, is that the men in the middle don't immediately know which end the shooting is coming from. It creates a half-second of directional confusion. And half a second at the distances you'll be working is all the time you need. First shot, far right man, down, work the bolt. Second shot, far left man, because now the two in the middle were both looking right toward where their partner had just fallen. Down, work the bolt. Third man had figured it out. He was moving low and fast back toward the rock cover behind him. Smart, fast. Emily led him by 2 feet, compensated for the uphill angle, and fired. He went down 10 yards short of the rocks. The fourth man had gone completely flat and was not moving. She held on his position for 4 seconds. He didn't move. Smart man, she thought. Stay there. She swung her scope back to the west wall. The primary assault team of 6 was moving. They were closer than she had estimated. They had used the sound of the main firefight to cover a faster approach than she had projected. They were at the base of the wall now, 2 men with a breaching charge moving toward the medical bay door. She had maybe 90 seconds. She keyed the radio clipped to her jacket. She had taken it from the barracks on her way to the roof, a habit her grandfather had called tactical awareness, and the SEALs would have called stealing equipment. Dolan, west wall, now, they're at the door. We're 30 seconds out. Dolan's voice came back, and there was something in it she had never heard from him before. Not respect, not yet, but the specific tone of a man who has stopped arguing with reality. I need 30 seconds of covering fire on the ridge above the west wall, she said. Suppression only. Keep their heads down while you move. You're directing my fire team from the roof. Do you want the medical bay or not? A pause, very short. Webb Martinez, suppression fire ridge, above west wall, 30 seconds. Move on my mark. A beat. Mark. The compound filled with outgoing fire. Emily used the noise. She found the man with the breaching charge at 60 yards, too close for a long rifle shot in terms of the angle, but she had the elevation advantage from the roof and the trajectory worked. She fired. He went down. The breaching charge skidded across the dirt. The second man at the door grabbed it. She worked the bolt. He looked up. For one fraction of a second and across 60 yards of Afghan night, the man at the medical bay door looked directly up at the rooftop where Emily Carter was looking directly back at him through a Night Force scope. She fired. The breaching charge hit the dirt again. And then Dolan's team hit the west wall from the inside, and the assault collapsed into a close quarters fight that lasted 4 minutes and 40 seconds and ended with the remaining members of the assault team pulling back into the darkness toward the ridge. Emily heard it happen below her. She heard the shouting, the shots, the specific terrible sounds of close combat, and she held the ridge with her scope and picked off 2 support elements that tried to provide covering fire for the retreating assault team. And when it was over and the firing slowed and then stopped and the silence came back, a different kind of silence now. The silence after rather than the silence before she kept her position. She kept her eye in the scope. She kept counting. Because this was the moment her grandfather had warned her about most specifically. This was the moment that got people killed. The cease in fire, he had said, feels like the end. Your body wants it to be the end. Your mind starts to relax before you've confirmed it's over. That relaxation is the most dangerous 30 seconds of any engagement. More people die in the 30 seconds after the shooting stops than in the middle of the shooting, because in the middle they're focused, and at the end they let go too early. Emily did not let go. She counted 6 minutes of silence before she let herself take her eye from the scope. Her hands were shaking. She had not noticed them shaking during the engagement. She noticed it now, a fine, rapid tremor running from her fingertips up through her wrists, the delayed physiological response to 2 hours of sustained adrenaline that her body had been politely postponing until she gave it permission to react. She sat with her back against the roof access structure and let her hands shake. She looked up at the sky. The stars over the Afghan mountains were extraordinary, a canopy of cold, indifferent light that had nothing to say about what had just happened below them. She had noticed the stars on her first night at FOB Kestrel and thought about her grandfather who had told her once that snipers develop a particular relationship with night sky because they spend so much time inside it. You learn to navigate by it, he had said. You learn to tell time by its own. You stop being afraid of the dark because the dark is where you live. She heard boots on the roof access stairs. She brought the rifle up. The hatch opened and Danny Okafor came through it with his hands visible and his eyes wide and his voice very carefully steady in the way that medical people learn to keep their voices when they are dealing with something outside their training parameters. "It's me," he said. "Okafor, I'm coming up." She lowered the rifle. He came through the hatch and stood there, looking at her for a moment at the rifle, at the empty shell casings scattered across the roof surface, at her face, at the bruise on her wrist from where Dolan had grabbed her. "How many?" he said. She knew what he was asking. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I wasn't counting." He nodded slowly. "Dolan wants you downstairs." "I know." "He's not angry," Okafor said, and then seemed to hear how that sounded because he added, "I mean, he is, but not the way he usually is. It's different." "Okay. Carter," he paused. "There are men alive right now because of what you did up here tonight." She looked at him. He was one of the few people at FOB Kestrel who ever looked back at her directly. She had always appreciated it without ever telling him so. "Let me check that wrist before you go down," he said. She held it out. He examined it with professional hands, pressing carefully along the bones, watching her face for the involuntary response that would tell him more than she would. "Not broken," he said, "badly bruised. You're going to have full color on this by morning." He paused. "Did Dolan do this?" "This morning," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Come on," he said. "Let's go down." She stood. She looked at the ridgeline one more time, the mountains sitting quiet and dark and enormous under the stars, giving nothing away the way they always did. She had learned in 11 months that the mountains did not care. They had been here long before the base, and they would be here long after. The fighting was a human problem. The mountains just watched. She picked up the rifle. She followed Okafor down through the hatch. The compound below was a different place than the one she had left 4 hours ago. The blast damage from the mortar rounds had taken out a section of the north wall and destroyed the storage shed adjacent to the motor pool. There were burn marks across the compound floor. There were men she recognized sitting against the blast walls with the specific loose posture of people whose bodies had used up everything they had and were now waiting for the invoice. 2 of the SEALs who had been hit in the initial barrage were being treated in the medical bay. Okafor had told her on the way down that neither wound was fatal. She had filed that information away with the precision of someone who has been managing inventory for 11 months and knows the weight of every item. Dolan was standing in the center of the compound. He was looking at the ridgeline. When he heard her boots on the ground behind him, he turned. She had expected many things from that moment. More anger, an official reprimand, the particular cold fury of a man whose authority has been dramatically undermined in front of his unit. She had prepared herself on the walk down from the roof for the version of Dolan she knew best. She had not prepared herself for the version of Dolan she got. He looked at her for a long moment without saying anything. His face was doing something complicated. She had watched this man's face across a mess hall table for 11 months, and she had cataloged every expression he owned, and this one was not in the catalog. "How long?" he said finally. "How long have you been able to do that?" It was not quite a question. "Since I was 16, she said. Something moved through his face. "Your grandfather." She nodded. He looked down at the ground. He looked at the rifle in her hands. He looked back at the ridgeline. "I have a casualty report to file," he said mostly to himself. "I have a report that's going to say we repelled a 40-man assault with 17 personnel and no SEAL element in-house." He stopped. He looked at her again. "They're going to ask how." "Tell them the truth," Emily said. "The truth," he repeated. "The truth is that someone at this base had been watching that ridge for 3 weeks, and you were told about it twice and didn't act on it," she said. Her voice was still flat. She was not angry. She had spent all her anger somewhere in the 11 months before tonight. What was left was just factual. And then, when the attack came, that same person got on a roof and did their job. That's the truth. Dolan stared at her. Behind him, she could see several SEALs who had come to stand at a distance. Marcus Webb with his coffee black, two sugars eyes gone very serious. Three others whose names she knew from their orders, whose lives she had just spent 2 hours protecting from a rooftop while they didn't know who was doing it. Nobody was laughing. Carter, Dolan said. Sergeant, that thing you said about the thermal inversion layer in the drone scan calibration. He paused. You were right. I know, she said, another complicated movement in his face. And the camera, the northwest corner camera. I documented it twice, she said. It's in the maintenance log. I know, he said, and the way he said it was so different from every other time she had stood in this compound and said something that was true and been told essentially to go away and make breakfast. It was different enough that she almost didn't know what to do with it. Webb stepped forward from the group behind Dolan. He was a big man, Marcus Webb, broad-shouldered and capable and funny, in the way that combat soldiers learn to be funny as a survival mechanism. She had watched him for 11 months, and she had known within the first 3 weeks that under the jokes and the casual cruelty of the mess hall culture, he was a fundamentally decent person who had never examined what it cost the people around him to absorb his decency's absence. You hit the sniper at 700 yards, he said, in the dark. 720, she said. He absorbed that. And the machine gun position. 940. In the dark, he said again. There was a half moon, she said, and the muzzle flashes helped. He looked at her for a long time. I'm the one who laughed, he said, this morning. When Dolan, he stopped. I laughed. She looked at him. I know, she said. He didn't have anything to add to that. There wasn't anything to add. The fact of it sat between them with the particular weight of something that cannot be taken back. And Emily had enough respect for Marcus Webb's fundamental decency to not try to make it lighter than it was. Thank you, he said finally, for what you did up there. She nodded once. She became aware that the compound had gotten very quiet. All of the remaining personnel SEAL support staff, Okafor Tran, who had come out from the communication shed with wide eyes and her headset still around her neck, were looking at Emily with an expression she had never seen directed at her before. Not pity, not dismissal, not the blank non-regard of people who have already decided what category you belong in. Something else. Something that looked uncomfortably and almost painfully like the beginning of recognition. Emily did not know what to do with it. She had spent 11 months learning how to be invisible, learning how to move through this compound like furniture, learning how to absorb the weight of being unseen without letting it bend her. She had built a self that functioned perfectly in the absence of recognition, and now recognition was here, and it felt foreign in a way she hadn't expected. Not unwelcome, just foreign. Like a language she had studied for years suddenly being spoken to her in the street. I need to clean the rifle, she said. Nobody moved. And I think I should probably make coffee, she said. It's almost 5 a.m. Dolan made a sound that was almost a laugh, almost. Yeah, he said. Yeah, Carter, make the coffee. She walked toward the mess hall. She was halfway across the compound when she heard Okafor behind her, his voice carrying across the quiet. For what it's worth, he called after her. I always knew your name. She stopped walking. She did not turn around. But she stood still for just a moment in the middle of the blasted, smoke-smelling compound in the gray pre-dawn light, with a rifle in her hands, an empty shell casing still in her jacket pocket, and she let herself feel it just for a moment, just for one breath, the specific warmth of being seen by someone who had chosen to see her when they didn't have to. Then she went and made the coffee. She started it at 4:57 in the morning, the same as every other day. Except that when the coffee was ready and she set it out and the SEALs came in one by one and filled their cups, none of them joked. None of them called her Betty Crocker. None of them pretended she wasn't there. Marcus Webb poured his cup, added 2 sugars, looked at her. Best coffee I've ever had, he said. She looked at him. It's the same coffee I've made every morning for 11 months, she said. I know, he said, and he went and sat down. Emily stood behind the counter and looked at the north-facing window. The mountains were turning gold with the first light. 3 kilometers away, the ridge that had been full of men a few hours ago sat empty and quiet in the early morning color, keeping its secrets the way it always did, the way it always would. Somewhere up there, the rocks held the evidence of what had happened in the night. In a few hours, the patrol element would return, and find a base that had survived something it shouldn't have been able to survive. And then a completely different kind of conversation would begin. Emily was not thinking about that yet. She was thinking about her grandfather. She was thinking about a small kitchen table in Montana and a cup of coffee and a voice that had told her with absolute certainty that the moment would come. She was thinking that he had been right. He was almost always right. She reached under the counter, pulled out her leather journal, and opened it to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote the date. Below it, she wrote the wind speed at 03:47 hours, the temperature, the elevation differential, the distances. She wrote it all down the way he had taught her, precise and complete, because records matter and details matter, and the work is not finished until it is documented. At the very bottom of the page, in smaller letters than the rest, she wrote one more line. She looked at it for a moment, then she closed the journal, put it back under the counter, and went to start breakfast. Because there were people to feed. There had always been people to feed. That hadn't changed. But something else had. Lieutenant Commander Patrick Reeves got back to FOB Kestrel at 06:12 hours. His patrol vehicles came through the main gate in a column dusty and road-worn from the overnight operation, and the first thing Reeves saw when he stepped out of the lead vehicle was the north wall, or rather, the section of the north wall that no longer existed. The mortar damage had taken out a 12-foot section of blast barrier and collapsed the storage shed behind it into a pile of corrugated metal and broken timber. Burn marks radiated outward across the compound floor from 3 separate impact points. The gate itself had taken a hit that had bent the reinforcement bar and left a crack running diagonally through the lower section. Reeves stood in the middle of his compound and turned slowly in a full circle. He had been in combat for 16 years. He knew what a base looked like after it had been hit hard. He knew the particular grammar of destruction that a coordinated night assault leaves behind. He could read the compound the way other men read a newspaper. What he was reading did not make sense. Dolan, he said. Dolan was standing 20 feet away, and the expression on his face was one Reeves had never seen there before. Dolan was a man who processed everything through a filter of controlled competence. Nothing surprised him, nothing rattled him, nothing produced on his face the look that was currently on it. The look of a man who has spent the night revising his understanding of something fundamental. "Sir," Dolan said, "talk to me." At 03:47, we were hit by a coordinated assault. Approximately 40 personnel, 3-direction approach, mortars and machine gun support from the ridge. We were at 17 effective. Patrol was out. Reeves looked at the wall, looked back at Dolan. 17. "Yes, sir." "Against 40. "Yes, sir." "And we're standing here having this conversation." "Yes, sir." Reeves waited, and Dolan said, "We had support from an elevated position." "What elevated position? Who authorized a shooter on the roof?" Dolan's jaw moved slightly. "No one, sir." "Then who?" "Carter, sir." The name meant nothing to Reeves for a full 2 seconds. He searched his mental roster of base personnel and came up with a vague shape, a woman food service, quiet background presence in the mess hall. He had eaten her cooking for 3 months and could not have picked her out of a lineup. "The cook," he said. "Yes, sir." Reeves stared at him. Corporal Carter got on the roof with a personal rifle and provided sniper support for the duration of the engagement, Dolan said. He paused. She took out the enemy sniper first, 720 yards, then the machine gun position at 940, then the RPG teams on the east slope, then the support element covering the west wall breach attempt. Another pause, longer. 6 targets on the final sequence, moving, 14 seconds. The compound was very quiet. The returning patrol team had gathered behind Reeves without him noticing, drawn in by the conversation, the way people are drawn to something that rewrites the rules. 6 targets, Reeves said. Moving. Yes, sir, I was on the ground. I watched it happen. Reeves turned and looked at his assembled men. They looked back at him with the same expression Dolan was wearing, that fundamental revision look, the look of people whose categories have been broken open. Where is she? Reeves said. Mess hall, sir, Dolan said. Making breakfast. Reeves walked across the compound. He pushed open the mess hall door. Emily was at the stove. She heard the door and then looked over her shoulder, and when she saw Reeves, she turned back to the stove without changing expression and said, Eggs are in 10 minutes, sir. Coffee's ready. Reeves walked to the serving counter and stood there. Corporal Carter, he said. Sir, look at me, please. She set down the spatula. She turned and looked at him directly, and Reeves, who had looked into the eyes of a lot of people in a lot of different circumstances, saw something there that he had not expected. Not pride, not defiance, not the carefully constructed neutrality of someone managing their emotions in front of a superior. Just a kind of steady, clean clarity. The look of someone who has done what needed doing and is now back to doing what needs doing next. Tell me what happened last night, he said. I filed 2 reports in the prior 3 weeks about potential activity on the North Ridge, she said. Neither was actioned. At 0347, the base was attacked. I got on the roof and provided support until the assault withdrew. With a personal weapon. Yes, sir. A rifle you brought to this base without declaring it. Yes, sir. He held her gaze. Why, Basema? He said. She looked at him for a moment. Because my grandfather told me never to be somewhere dangerous without it. Something moved through Reeves's face. Who's your grandfather? Walter Carter, she said. Retired Marine. Vietnam 2 tours, scout sniper. Reeves was still for a moment. Then he said very quietly, Walter Carter from the 3rd Marine Division. The ghost of Khe Sanh. Emily looked at him steadily. He didn't like that name. I know, Reeves said. I read his file at sniper school. Everyone read his file. He paused. He's your grandfather. Yes, sir. Reeves put both hands flat on the counter and looked down at them for a moment. Then he looked back up. Corporal Carter, he said. I owe you an apology. She said nothing. Not just me, he said. This entire unit. For 11 months he stopped. For not seeing you. She held his gaze. With respect, sir, she said. That's not the conversation that matters right now. He blinked. The northwest camera is still misaligned, she said. The surveillance corridor on the North Ridge is still uncovered. Whoever organized last night's assault knows our patrol schedule, which means we have an intelligence problem somewhere in our supply chain or our communications. And the 4-man support element I left on the ridge, the one on the far left, didn't run. He went flat and stayed there. That means he's trained, he's patient, and he's probably still up there counting our personnel. Total silence in the mess hall. Reeves stared at her. How long have you known about the intelligence leak? He said. I've suspected it for 6 weeks, she said. The patrol schedule for last night was issued to local contractors for logistics coordination 14 days ago. The assault team had detailed knowledge of our gate strength and patrol timing. That's not reconnaissance, that's inside information. Reeves turned around. Webb was standing in the doorway, Martinez behind him, 3 more men at his back. You all heard that, Reeves said. It was not a question. Yes, sir, Webb said. Full base lockdown. Communications audit starting immediately. Nobody talks to the supply contractors until I say otherwise. He turned back to Emily. I need everything you've observed in the last 6 weeks. Every irregularity, every pattern, every instinct. Written up in the next 2 hours. I already have it, she said. She reached under the counter and produced a leather journal. She set it in front of him. He opened it. He went very still. The journal contained 62 days of detailed observations. Wind patterns, personnel movements, supply irregularities, communications, timing, shadow patterns on the ridge, behavioral changes in the local workers who made deliveries twice a week. It was written in a precise, clear hand with the kind of structured notation that military intelligence analysts used, except Emily had never been an intelligence analyst, had never been trained as one, had simply been paying attention for 11 months while everyone around her paid attention to everything except her. Carter Reeves said, without looking up from the journal, "What is your current assignment?" "Food service, sir." He turned a page. "Not anymore," he said. She looked at him. "I'm reassigning you effective immediately to a direct support role under my command. You'll work with our intelligence specialist, and you'll formalize everything in this journal into an official threat assessment." He looked up. "And you will carry that rifle openly from this point forward. That's a direct order." She held his gaze for a long moment. "What about breakfast?" she said. Reeves looked at her, and for the first time in 11 months inside FOB Kestrel, someone looked at Emily Carter and laughed, not at her, not past her, but with the genuine startled warmth of a person surprised by something unexpectedly human in a hard place. "Webb," Reeves said, still looking at Emily, "you're on breakfast." Sir, Webb said from the doorway. Eggs, 10 minutes. You heard the corporal? A long pause. I don't know how to make eggs, sir. Then it's going to be a learning experience, Reeves said. Carter, my office, bring the journal. She came around the counter. She walked past Webb, who was standing in the doorway looking at the stove with the expression of a man confronting something genuinely outside his skill set. 2 sugars, she said as she passed him. In the coffee. I know you do it anyway. She heard him make a sound behind her that might have been embarrassment or might have been a laugh. Probably both. She followed Reeves across the compound. At 0700 hours, FOB Kestrel's situation changed in a way nobody had briefed. The intelligence specialist, a quiet staff sergeant named Holloway, not to be confused with Private Holloway, from the motor pool, a distinction that had caused administrative confusion for months, sat across from Emily in Reeves' office and read through the journal for 22 minutes without saying a word. Then he looked up and said, "How did you know the supply chain timing was off?" "The Tuesdays," Emily said. "Our supply deliveries are scheduled for Tuesdays. For the first 4 months I was here, they came between 0900 and 1100. Then in month A, they started arriving at 0730, 30 minutes before our morning patrol rotation completed. That means someone told the delivery coordinator our patrol schedule. Delivery drivers have 30 minutes of unsupervised access to the outer compound while the gate team is still in transition. That's a window." Holloway looked at Reeves. Reeves looked back at him. "The assault team knew the patrol was going out at 1800, Holloway said slowly. They knew the gate strength would drop to 17. The patrol schedule was in the logistics brief that went to the supply coordinator on the 14th, Emily said. I wasn't on the distribution list for that brief, but I was in the mess hall when Dolan mentioned it to the gate sergeant on the 13th, and I was in the supply room when the coordinator picked up his copy on the 14th. He read it in the supply room. He was there for 11 minutes. He should have been there for 3. Another silence. You timed him, Holloway said. I time everything, Marzefli said. I've been timing everything for 11 months because I didn't have anything else to do except cook and pay attention. Holloway set down the journal. He looked at her with an expression that was half professional assessment and half something more personal, the look of someone encountering a kind of intelligence they hadn't budgeted for in their model of the world. Corporal Carter, he said, where did you go to school? Montana State, she said. Logistics and nutrition science. He looked at Reeves again. Reeves said, I know. Sir, this woman should not be, I know Holloway. She's been sitting in a mess hall for 11 months when she could have been. I know, Reeves said, and his voice was quiet in a way that was not calm, but was instead the specific quietness of a man dealing with a fact that he cannot undo and has to live with anyway. Write it up. I want a full recommendation for reassignment and a security review on the supply coordinator by noon. Holloway nodded. He picked up the journal, then stopped and looked at Emily. Can I keep this? He said. No, she said. He blinked. It's mine, she said. I'll give you transcribed copies of the relevant sections, but the journal is mine. A pause. Fair enough, he said. He left. Reeves and Emily sat alone in his office. Outside, she could hear the base reorganizing itself, the particular sounds of a military installation that has been through something and is now doing the hard work of assessing and recovering and preparing for whatever comes next. Voices, equipment, the distant sound of someone, probably Webb, producing what she guessed was a genuinely terrible breakfast. I need to ask you something, Reeves said. Sir, last night on the roof. He paused. How were you? She looked at him. I mean inside, he said. The first time it's a person and not a target. I need to know how you are. She was quiet for a moment. She had been quiet about this since she came off the roof. She had been quiet about it through the coffee and through the conversation with Dolan and through the conversation with Webb and through Okafor checking her wrist, and she had been quiet about it in the specific, deliberate way that she had learned to be quiet about things that were true and large and not ready to be spoken yet. My grandfather told me it would be the hardest thing, she said. What the shot? The knowing. He was right, Reeves said. He usually was. Are you okay? She considered the question honestly. Not the social version of it, the version that requires the answer, fine, thank you. The actual question. I don't know yet, she said. I think I will be. I think I did what needed doing and I think I can carry it. But I don't know yet. Reeves nodded. That's the right answer, he said. The people who say yes immediately are the ones I worry about. She looked at him. My grandfather said that too, she said. Almost exactly. Something passed between them. Not warmth exactly, but the particular recognition between people who have been shaped by the same kind of hard knowledge. There's going to be a formal review, Reeves said. The unauthorized weapon, the unauthorized combat position, the whole thing. I can't make that go away. You know that. I know, she said. I'm going to put in a full account of what happened and what your actions prevented. Every detail. I'm also going to make formal recommendations. He paused. But the review process is what it is. Are you prepared for that? Yes, sir. They may not see it the way I see it. They never do, she said, at first. He was quiet. Then at 0847 hours, everything changed again. The communications shed erupted. They heard Tran's voice first, sharp-clipped, the professional alarm of someone who has just received information they cannot quite process. And then they heard her feet on the compound floor moving fast toward Reeves' office, and she hit the door without knocking. Sir, she said, I've got JSOC on the line. They want to talk to whoever was on the roof last night. Reeves stood up. JSOC, he said. Joint Special Operations Command, sir. Directly. They said... She stopped. She looked at Emily, back at Reeves. They said they had a surveillance asset on the ridge last night, a drone, high-altitude thermal suppression bypass. They were running an independent operation tracking the same unit that hit us. Reeves went very still. They have footage, Tran said, of the assault. Of the roof, sir, of... She stopped again, and this time the thing on her face was not professional urgency, but something more fundamental, the look of someone trying to find a frame for something they didn't expect to have to frame. They have full thermal footage of every shot taken from the roof last night. They want to know who the shooter was. They said, she looked at Emily one more time, they said they've never seen anything like it. The office was absolutely silent. Emily sat in her chair. She felt something move through her that was not pride and was not fear, but was somewhere in the complicated territory between them. The feeling of being seen by an eye you didn't know was watching the feeling of a secret that has kept you safe for a long time, choosing its own moment to stop being a secret. Tell them to hold, Reeves had said to Tran. Tran left. Reeves looked at Emily. JSOC, he said again. Yes, sir. They have thermal footage of every shot. Yes, sir. Emily. He used her name. Not Carter, not Corporal. Her name in the voice of a man making a deliberate choice. Whatever comes next, whatever the review finds, whatever JSOC wants, whatever the process does or doesn't do, I want you to know that what you did last night matters. Not just operationally. It matters in the way that things matter when they're true and real and can't be taken back. She looked at him steadily. Those are my men, he said, and they're alive because of you. She did not look away. With respect, sir, she said, they were my unit too. He held her gaze. Then he nodded once with the full weight of someone who has heard something and will not forget it. Come on, he said. Let's go talk to JSOC. She stood. She picked up her grandfather's journal from the desk. She tucked it under her arm and followed Reeves out of the office across the compound toward the communications shed where a line was open to Joint Special Operations Command, and someone on the other end was waiting to talk to the ghost on the roof. The compound was different now in the morning light. The same blast walls, the same burned compound floor, the same broken north wall waiting for repair. Nothing had been fixed yet. Everything physical was exactly as the night had left it. But the people were different. As Emily crossed the compound, she felt it the shift in the air around her, the way eyes tracked her movement, not with the blank non-attention of a person categorized as furniture, but with the specific attention of people recalibrating. Martinez nodded as she passed. Two SEALs she barely knew by name straightened slightly, an instinctive thing, the body language of people adjusting their posture for someone they have reclassified. Webb was standing outside the mess hall, holding a plate of something that looked genuinely alarming. Carter, he said. She stopped. He held out the plate. On it was a pile of eggs that had been cooked at too high a heat for too long and had taken on a color and texture that could charitably be described as challenging. I made eggs, he said. She looked at the plate. I can see that, she said. They're terrible, he said. They look terrible, she agreed. I don't know how you do it, he said, and he meant the eggs, but he also meant something else, and they both knew it, and neither of them said it. Practice, she said. She kept walking. Behind her, she heard him say it quietly, almost to himself, not for her to hear, but she heard it anyway because Emily Carter heard everything. 367 mornings, he said, and nobody said thank you once. She did not stop, but she held it. She held it alongside the bruise on her wrist, in the empty shell casing still in her jacket pocket, and the weight of her grandfather's journal under her arm, and she carried all of it forward across the compound toward whatever JSOC had to say, toward whatever came next, toward the version of her life that was about to begin, whether she was ready for it or not. She was ready for it. She had been ready for a long time. At the door of the communications shed, she stopped. She took one breath. She thought of Walter Carter at a kitchen table in Montana, hands around a coffee mug, blue eyes steady, telling a 12-year-old girl who didn't know yet what she was going to become. The most dangerous weapon in the world is the one nobody sees coming. She pushed open the door. She sat down in front of the radio. She said, "This is Corporal Emily Carter. I was the shooter on the roof. What do you need to know?" And the voice that came back through the static was not what she expected. It was not bureaucratic. It was not investigative. It was not the controlled official tone of a command element running an inquiry. It was the voice of a man who had been watching thermal footage for 3 hours and had not yet found a frame for what he had seen, and when he spoke, his voice carried the specific quality of someone who is trying to stay professional in the presence of something that keeps exceeding the boundaries of professional vocabulary. "Corporal Carter," the voice said. "My name is Colonel James Whitfield, JSOC Operations Director. I've been doing this for 22 years. A pause. "I've never seen shooting like that," he said. "Not from anyone, not anywhere, not in 22 years. Emily sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "What do you need to know, Colonel?" And Colonel Whitfield told her, and what he told her was not a question. It was an offer. Colonel Whitfield's offer was not simple. Nothing involving JSOC ever was. He spoke for 11 minutes on that open line, and Emily sat in the communications shed with Reeves standing behind her and Tran pretending to work her equipment and actually listening to every word. And what Whitfield laid out was not a reward, and it was not a formality. It was a door, a specific, narrow, extraordinarily difficult door that very few people in the history of the American military had ever been invited to walk through. And he was holding it open for a corporal who had been making eggs and coffee for 11 months in a forgotten outpost in Afghanistan. He wanted her at Scout Sniper School, not the standard pipeline, not the waiting list that most candidates spent 2 years on before they were even considered. The accelerated assessment track reserved for candidates who came to JSOC's attention through operational performance rather than the conventional nomination process. 6 weeks of the most demanding marksmanship evaluation in the American military, followed by the full 12-week course if she passed the assessment, followed by a formal reassignment recommendation if she passed the course. "The footage we have from last night," Whitfield said, "shows 21 confirmed engagements over a 114-minute period. Longest confirmed shot was 941 yards. All engagements in low-light conditions with a non-issued rifle on an unsupported rooftop position without a spotter. The accuracy rate from what we can confirm on the thermal imaging is..." He paused, and the pause had weight in it, the weight of a number he was still processing. "It's 100%, Corporal, 21 for 21. Emily said nothing. Reeves put his hand briefly on the back of her chair. Just for a second, she felt it. "I have one question before anything else," Whitfield said. "Sir, the second shot, the enemy sniper at 720 yards, you missed the first one." "Yes, sir." "The thermal shows a 3-second window between the first shot and the second. During that window, the target had acquired your position and was bringing his weapon to bear." He paused. 3 seconds, oh Corporal, at 700 yards in the dark, after a miss. Most trained snipers would have broken position, relocated, reset. That's the doctrine. That's what you're supposed to do." "Yes, sir." "You didn't move." "No, sir." "Why?" The shed was perfectly quiet. Emily thought about the answer for exactly the length of time it took, to be honest. "Because relocation would have cost me 8 to 12 seconds, she said. "I'd done the wind calculation. I knew the miss was a flinch, not a data error. The correction was mechanical, not positional. Moving would have been the wrong answer. A long pause on the line. Who taught you that? Whitfield said. My grandfather, sir. Walter Carter. Yes, sir. Another pause. Longer. I knew Walter Carter, Whitfield said. Not personally, but I knew his record the way everyone in this business knows his record. He stopped. He would have made the same call. Emily held the radio handset and said nothing because there was nothing to say that wouldn't be smaller than the moment. Be at Camp Pendleton in 10 days, Whitfield said. I'll have orders cut today. Any questions? She had one. The formal review, sir. The unauthorized weapon, the unauthorized combat position. I'm aware of the review. It hasn't been resolved. Corporal Carter, Whitfield said, and his voice carried the specific texture of a man who has made decisions that move large things. By the time you land at Pendleton, the review will reflect that your actions on the night of the engagement were consistent with the defense of a military installation under active hostile assault, and that the weapon in question was employed in direct service of force protection. That's what happened. That's what the record will say. Reeves exhaled behind her. Yes, sir, Emily said. One more thing, Whitfield said. Sir, is there anything you need before you leave that base? She thought about it. New eggs, she said. Webb destroyed the last batch. A pause. Then Colonel James Whitfield, JSOC Operations Director, 22-year veteran, laughed. It was a real laugh, unprepared. The kind that happens when something catches a person off guard in a moment when their guard is already down. Noted, he said. Carter out. The line closed. The shed was quiet. Tran was staring at her console with an expression that suggested she had heard every word and was doing the internal work of fitting it into her understanding of the person she had shared a barracks with for 11 months. Reeves stepped around from behind her chair and sat on the edge of Tran's equipment table and looked at Emily with his hands clasped between his knees. 10 days, he said. Yes, sir. You know what the assessment pass rate is for that track? 11%, she said. He nodded. And the course itself? 23% completed at full qualification, she said. Most candidates who don't wash out take 18 months to reach qualification standard. Some take longer. Reeves looked at her. You've researched this. I've been researching it for 4 years, she said. Since I enlisted. I knew this was the only path that made sense for my skill set. I just needed someone to open the door. He was quiet for a moment. 4 years, he said. You've been working toward this for 4 years. Yes, sir. While cooking breakfast. A person can do more than one thing, she said. He stood up. He extended his hand. She looked at it for a moment and then shook it. His grip was firm and direct and said everything that military men use handshakes to say when words feel insufficient. When you graduate, he said, and you will graduate when you come out the other side of this, I want to be the first person you call. You'll be the second, she said. He understood immediately. Tell Walter I said he did something remarkable, Reeves said. She held his gaze. He'll say he just taught me to pay attention, she said. Then tell him paying attention is a remarkable thing, Reeves said. Most people never learn it. She picked up her journal from the table. She walked out of the communications shed into the morning light. She had 9 days left at FOB Kestrel. She used them. She used the first day to formally document everything in her journal into the structured intelligence reports that Holloway needed for the supply chain security review. She sat with him for 6 hours going through every observation, every timing discrepancy, every behavioral anomaly she had cataloged over 11 months, and she watched the expression on his face move through several stages. Professional interest, growing urgency, the particular tight focus of someone realizing that the thing they are looking at is bigger and more serious than they initially estimated. On the second day, the supply coordinator was quietly detained pending investigation. On the third day, Holloway told her that her observations had identified a network, not a single actor. 3 people in the logistics chain had been passing information. The assault on FOB Kestrel had been months in the planning. Without Emily's documentation, the investigation would have had nowhere to start. You built the entire case, Holloway said. Without meaning to, without anyone asking you to, you just watched. I didn't have anything else to do, she said. He looked at her. Carter, he said, you're the most wasted resource I've ever seen in 12 years of this work. And I've seen some genuinely wasted resources. She thought about that. Not wasted, she said. Positioned. He frowned. My grandfather told me that the value of an unseen position isn't just what you can hit from it, she said. It's what you can observe from it. I spent 11 months in the best observation post on this base. I saw everything. Nobody saw me seeing it. She paused. That's not waste. That's reconnaissance. Holloway stared at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen and wrote something in his own notebook. She did not ask what. On the fourth day, something happened that she had not prepared for. She was in the mess hall at 0600, starting the breakfast prep habit, muscle memory, the routine that had structured her days for almost a year, when the door opened and Sergeant Dolan came in. Not for coffee, not for an order. He came in and stood on the other side of the serving counter and put both hands flat on the surface the same way Reeves had, and he looked at her. He looked terrible, she noticed. He had the specific haggard look of a man who has not been sleeping because he is doing something harder than sleeping. He was doing the work of examining himself. I've been trying to figure out what to say to you, he said. She waited. I grabbed your wrist, he said, the morning of the attack. I hurt you. You did what she said. There's no version of that that's okay. I know that. I've known it since the moment I did it, but I've been telling myself for years that things like that are just the culture, the environment, the way it is. And I'm trying to figure out how I lived with that justification for as long as I did. She held the spatula she was holding and looked at him directly. I can tell you how, she said, because nobody pushed back, because the people around you accepted it, because I didn't report it, because the culture you're describing protects itself by making the people it hurts feel like reporting it would be more costly than absorbing it. She paused. I absorbed it for 11 months because I had a goal that required me to stay, not because it was acceptable. He held her gaze through all of that. He didn't flinch. She gave him credit for that. I filed a report this morning, he said, a voluntary self-report, the wrist incident, documented with my account. I told Reeves it's on me and it should be on my record. She was quiet. I know that doesn't fix anything, he said. No, she said, it doesn't. But it's what I can do, he said. It's the right thing. She looked at him for a long moment. It is the right thing, she said. I'm not going to tell you it erases anything. But it's the right thing, and the fact that you're doing it without anyone making you do it, that means something. He nodded. He stood there another moment. I was wrong about a lot of things, he said. About what you were, about what you were capable of, about what I owed you. He paused. I'm sorry, Carter. She looked at him across the serving counter. I know, she said. It wasn't forgiveness and it wasn't dismissal. It was something more honest than either an acknowledgement that the wrong had happened and the apology had been made, and both of those things were real and true, and the future would be built from where they were now, not from where they should have been. He left. She went back to the breakfast prep. At 1400 hours that same day, Reeves called the entire base to a formation in the compound. 28 personnel standing in the Sun Patrol, element, and base crew together, the repaired section of North Wall, still showing fresh concrete behind them. Reeves read from a sheet of paper, but he wasn't reading. He had the words memorized and the paper was a formality. He read out Emily's actions on the night of the attack. He read the specific engagements, the distances, the timeline. He read Whitfield's assessment from the JSOC communication. He read the intelligence contribution, the supply chain identification, the documented observations that had already led to 3 arrests in the logistics network. Then he put the paper down. Corporal Carter will be departing this base in 5 days for Scout Sniper assessment, he said. She will be the first person from this unit ever recommended directly to that track by JSOC Operational Command. She is leaving this base with a record that this unit should be proud to have been part of. He paused. And I want it on the record in front of every person standing here that for 11 months this unit failed Corporal Carter in ways that this unit is going to spend a long time accounting for. That's on me. It's on every one of us. The culture that allowed it ends today. Nobody moved. Emily stood at the end of the line and looked straight ahead. She felt the weight of it, not the burden kind of bite, but the other kind, the kind that anchors you, that tells you where you stand and what is real. The weight of being seen after a very long invisibility. She held it without letting it show on her face. Because Walter Carter had taught her something else. Something he had said on a cold Montana morning when she was 15 and had just hit a target at 800 yards for the first time and had let herself feel too much in the moment and had flinched on the follow-up shot. Emotion is information, he had said, not instruction. You feel it, you note it, you file it, and then you take the next shot. She noted it, she filed it. She stood at attention in the Afghan sun, and she took the next shot. On the fifth day, Okafor found her in the mess hall at 2100 hours after the base had gone quiet. She was sitting at one of the tables with her journal not writing, just sitting with it. The way you sit with something that has been your companion through a hard stretch and you are not quite ready to close. He sat down across from her. He didn't say anything for a while. "How's the wrist?" he said finally. "Fine," she said, fully mobile. "The bruise is going yellow." He nodded. "Are you scared?" he said. She looked at him. "About Pendleton?" She thought about it honestly. "Yes," she said. "Good," he said. "You should be. It means you understand what it is." She looked at him. "I did a rotation near Pendleton 2 years ago," he said. "I watched a sniper assessment class. I watched men who had been preparing for years wash out in the first week. Not because they couldn't shoot, because they couldn't manage what the shooting costs." He paused. "You can shoot Carter. Everyone knows you can shoot now. The question is everything else." "I know," she said. "Do you have people," he said, "when you get there? Do you have outside the wire? Do you have someone who knows where you are?" She thought of Montana. "My grandfather," she said. "Does he know about any of this?" "Not yet," she said. "You should call him." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "I want to tell you something," he said. "And I want you to hear it as coming from someone who has no angle on it, no career reason for it, nothing to gain." He looked at her steadily across the table. "I watched you every day for 11 months. I watched how you worked. I watched how you processed things. I watched how you absorbed what this unit did to you and kept moving without letting it make you smaller." He paused. "I've never seen that kind of strength. Not in anyone, not in uniform, not out of it. What you have is not a skill. It's a character. And character is the one thing nobody can train into you." She looked at him for a long moment. She felt the thing rise in her throat that she had been keeping below the waterline for 9 months, the specific pressure of an emotion that has been deferred too long, finding the first safe moment to move. She let it come up exactly far enough to be real. Then she nodded once. "Thank you, Danny," she said. His first name. She had never used it before. He smiled. "There it is," he said. 11 months. First time. "I didn't want you to get comfortable," she said. He laughed. She almost did. Almost. On the 9th day, she packed. It did not take long. She had not accumulated much. The journal, the rifle in its case, her clothing, a photograph of Walter Carter standing in a field in Montana with his old Remington that she had taken when she was 14 and printed on thin paper and kept folded inside the journal's back cover for 11 months. The small personal inventory of a person who had learned to carry only what was necessary. She made breakfast one last time. She made it well, the way she always made it. Full spread, hot on time, correct portions, coffee strong and ready before the first person came through the door. Webb came in first. He stopped when he saw the spread. He looked at her. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know," she said. "Your last morning and you're still." "It's what I do," she said. "It's what I've always done. That doesn't stop mattering just because something else started mattering too." He took his plate. He added his 2 sugars to his coffee. He looked at her one more time. "For what it's worth," he said. "I'm going to tell this story for the rest of my life." She looked at him. "Then tell it right," she said. He met her eyes. "I will," he said. She believed him. One by one, they came through the mess hall that morning. Every person on the base, and she served each of them with the same attention she had given for 11 months, the same precision, the same care that they had not known to look for until now. And now they looked. Every one of them looked, and she felt it without letting it change the work, because the work was its own thing and always had been independent of whether anyone saw it or not. That was something her grandfather had never had to teach her. She had understood it on her own at 4:30 in the morning in a dark mess hall, on the first of 367 mornings, when she had started the coffee before anyone was awake to drink it. You do the work because the work matters, not because someone is watching. Reeves drove her to the airfield himself. They did not talk much on the drive. The silence was the comfortable kind, the kind between people who have already said the essential things and don't need to fill the space with lesser words. At the airfield, standing next to the vehicle with the engines of the transport aircraft already running 30 yards away, Reeves reached into his jacket and produced a folded sheet of paper. "Personal letter of recommendation," he said, "for your file, not an official evaluation. Personal. My name, my rank, my own words." She took it. She looked at it. "Sir," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "It's not a favor, it's a fact. I'm just writing down what's already true." She folded it and placed it inside the journal. She picked up her bag. She picked up the rifle case. She looked at Reeves one last time. "When I graduate," she said, "I'll be the second call," he said. "You'll be the second call," she confirmed. She turned and walked toward the aircraft. She was halfway across the tarmac when she heard him behind her. "Carter." She stopped. She turned. He was standing by the vehicle in the dust, in the engine noise, and the brutal Afghan sunlight. And he looked, she thought she would think later, like a man who has just understood something. He should have understood a long time ago, and is trying to carry the late understanding with the same integrity he would have given the early one. "The ghost of Khe-san," he called over the engine noise. "Tell him his granddaughter is better." She held his gaze across 30 yards of tarmac. Then she turned back around. She did not smile. But somewhere in her chest something loosened that had been held tight for a very long time, and she carried that looseness onto the aircraft with her into the seat by the window, up into the air and away from the mountains that had watched everything and said nothing toward whatever came next. She opened the journal. She opened it to the page with her grandfather's photograph. She looked at his face, the steady blue eyes, the hands on the rifle, the particular expression of a man completely at home in the world he had chosen, the world he had built from patience and attention and the willingness to see what others overlooked. She thought about calling him. She would call him when she landed. She would tell him everything. She would hear his voice go quiet in the way it went quiet when something moved him, which was not often, and she would know by the quality of that quiet exactly what he was feeling. She thought about what he would say when she told him about the second shot. The flinch, the 3 seconds, the choice to hold position. She thought he would say nothing for a moment. And then she thought he would say, "Good, you trusted what you knew." And then she thought he would say something he had not said since she was 16 years old and had hit a target at 1,000 yards. And he had put his hand on her shoulder and said it simply and meant it completely. "That's my girl." The aircraft banked. Below, the mountains fell away. Below, OB Kestrel became small and then smaller, and then a suggestion in the landscape, a cluster of walls and burned compound floor, and one misaligned camera that had finally been fixed on the 7th day. Emily looked at it until she couldn't see it anymore. Then she opened her journal to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote Day 1. She looked at those 2 words. Then she began to write. She called her grandfather from a payphone at the transit hub in Bagram 20 minutes before her connecting flight. She had rehearsed what she would say on the aircraft. She had organized it the way she organized everything chronologically, factually, the essential information in the correct sequence. She had decided she would tell him about the attack first, then the shots, then Whitfield, then Pendleton. Clean and ordered the way he had taught her to think. She picked up the phone. She dialed. He answered on the second ring the way he always answered, and the sound of his voice low and steady and exactly as she remembered it. The voice of a man who had earned his stillness hit her somewhere she had not prepared for, and everything she had rehearsed dissolved in about half a second. "Grandpa," she said. A pause. "Emily." He knew. He heard it in one word the way he always heard things. "Talk to me." And she talked. She did not organize it. It came out the way things come out when the person on the other end is safe enough to receive the unorganized version. And Walter Carter listened without interrupting, without asking questions, without making the sounds that people make when they are processing out loud. He was silent and completely present in the way that only people who have truly learned how to listen ever are. She told him about the shadows on the mountain. She told him about Dolan. She told him about the rifle case in the footlocker and 367 mornings and the Northwest camera that nobody fixed. She told him about 0347 and the first shot and the flinch and the 3 seconds and the choice to hold. She told him about 21 shots. She told him about Whitfield. She told him about Pendleton. When she finished, the line was quiet for a long moment. Then Walter Carter said in a voice that was even quieter than usual, "You held position after the flinch." "Yes," she said. 3 seconds. "Yes," another silence. "I didn't teach you that," he said slowly. "I taught you the mechanics, but the decision to hold, that's not something you can teach. That comes from somewhere inside a person that either exists or it doesn't." He paused. "I've been waiting to find out if you had it." She stood at the payphone in the noise of the transit hub and felt something move through her that had no precise name, but that she recognized as the feeling of being known completely by someone who has watched you grow towards something for a very long time. "Did Reeves say anything about me?" Walter said. She almost smiled. "He said to tell you that you did something remarkable," she said, a pause. "Sentimental man," Walter said. "He also said you'd say that," she said. Walter made a sound that was as close to a laugh as he typically got. "Go to Pendleton," he said. "Do the work. Don't think about what it means. Just do the work." "I know," she said. "Call me when it's done." "I will." "Emily." "Yes." "I know," he said simply. She held the phone. "I know too," she said. She hung up. She picked up her bag. She picked up the rifle case. She walked to her gate. Camp Pendleton hit her like a physical force from the moment she stepped off the transport. Not the place itself. The weight of what the place meant. She had studied this course for 4 years from the outside, had read every available account, had built a mental model of its structure and its demands and its particular methodology of pressure. She thought she was prepared for the reality of it. She was not fully prepared. The assessment cadre was led by a master gunnery sergeant named Briggs, who had spent 19 years as a scout sniper and who looked at the 12 candidates assembled in front of him on the first morning with the specific expression of a man who has seen every version of overconfidence and is professionally interested in watching each new variety encounter reality. He walked the line. He stopped in front of Emily. He looked at her. He looked at the rifle case she was carrying. He looked back at her face. "Carter," he said. "Gunny." "I read the after action from Kestrel," he said. "JSOC sent it." She said nothing. 21 engagements, he said. 100% accuracy. Longest shot 941. He paused. "Unsupported, non-issued weapon. No spotter." "Yes, Gunny." He held her gaze. "That was a real thing," he said. "A real thing in a real situation with real consequences, and you performed it. Nobody in this cadre is going to take that away from you." He took one step closer. "But I want you to understand something, Carter. What you did at Kestrel does not exist inside these wire." He gestured at the training facility around them. "Inside these wire, you are a candidate. You have no record here. You have no reputation here. You have 11 other candidates who all believe they are the best thing that has ever walked into this program, and every single one of them is going to make it their business to test whether the woman JSOC fast-tracked actually deserves to be standing in this line." He paused. "Are we clear?" "Yes, Gunny," she said. "Are you going to have a problem with any of that?" "No, Gunny." He looked at her for another second. "Good answer," he said, and moved on. The other 11 candidates were watching her. She had known they would be. She had prepared for it the same way she prepared for everything, by accepting the reality of it without wasting energy on resistance, and then deciding exactly how she intended to behave within that reality. She intended to behave exactly as her grandfather had taught her. She intended to be furniture. The first week was designed to break people who had arrived with a story about themselves. The physical demands were extreme but survivable. She had been preparing her body for this for 4 years, and the fitness standards were achievable with the kind of quiet consistency she had applied to everything since she was 12 years old. What the first week was really testing was not the body. It was the mind's relationship to discomfort, to uncertainty, to the sustained absence of positive feedback in an environment that gave nothing away. Most candidates needed feedback. They needed to know how they were doing relative to the standard, relative to each other, relative to the cadre's expectations. The absence of that information created anxiety, and anxiety created the particular mental noise that interfered with the precision the course demanded. Emily did not need feedback. She had spent 11 months in an environment that gave her no feedback whatsoever and had learned to generate her own internal standard, her own measure of whether she was meeting the requirement. She applied that same self-referential calibration here, and it was, she recognized, probably the most valuable thing FOB Kestrel had given her, not the operational experience, not the shots on the ridge, but the 11 months of performing excellent work in complete silence, with no recognition, against no visible standard except the one she carried inside herself. On day 4, one of the other candidates, a staff sergeant named Kowalski, big and technically skilled, and carrying 11 months of Ranger service-like armor he never took off, made his assessment of Emily visible. He did it in front of 4 other candidates during a rest period with the casual confidence of someone who expects agreement and is not accustomed to not getting it. Fast track, he said. It was not a compliment. One good night in a permissive environment. JSOC loves a story. 2 of the other candidates said nothing, which was its own kind of agreement. Emily looked at Kowalski. 941 yards, she said. Moving targets on the west wall sequence. 14 seconds for 6. If you want to talk about the shots, I'm happy to talk about the shots. Kowalski looked at her. One night, he said, with your grandpa's rifle in a static position. Static position, I established myself in an active assault. Yes, she said. What's your longest confirmed shot, Kowalski? A silence. 8:12, he said. Supported. A longer silence. Yes, he said. She held his gaze. Then let's both go do the work, she said, and see where we are at the end. She picked up her kit. She walked away. Behind her, she heard nothing from Kowalski. That was fine. She did not need his agreement. She needed to shoot. The assessment escalated in week 2 into the long-range work, and this was where the field narrowed fast. 3 candidates were removed in the first 3 days of precision evaluation, not because they couldn't shoot, but because they couldn't shoot under the specific compound pressure of observation time constraint and environmental complexity that the course imposed simultaneously. The difference between a skilled shooter on a controlled range and a functioning sniper candidate was exactly that compound pressure. And it was a difference that destroyed people who had not built the right foundation inside themselves. Emily shot clean. Not perfectly. She had 2 wind call corrections in the first 3 days that she logged in her own notes and analyzed and adjusted for. But clean within standard, within time, with the internal consistency that told Briggs and his cadre something more important than the individual scores. It told them she was coachable. It told them that when she was wrong, she knew she was wrong, identified why, and corrected without ego. This was rarer than the marksmanship. Briggs said nothing about it directly. He said nothing about her performance at all for the first 9 days, which was consistent with his approach to all the candidates. But on the evening of day 9, he stopped next to her during the equipment maintenance period and stood there for a moment without speaking, watching her work the bolt on the Remington with the automatic efficiency of someone who has done it 10,000 times. Your grandfather customized this stock himself, he said. She looked up. Yes, Gunny. Walnut, he said, hand-shaped. You can tell by the grain distribution on the pistol grip. He paused. I've seen his rifles in photographs, the ones from his service record. He looked at the weapon with the appreciation of a man who understands what he is looking at. This is the one he kept. He gave it to me when I turned 18, she said. Why'd he give it to you? She looked at the rifle. He said it deserves someone who would use it for something worth doing, she said. Briggs was quiet for a moment. He was right, he said. He walked away. She watched him go. Then she went back to the maintenance. On day 12, Kowalski washed out. It was not a dramatic failure. It rarely was. He simply stopped hitting his marks under the specific compound pressure of the timed field evolution. And when the cadre reviewed his data alongside his self-assessment, the gap between what he believed he had done and what the data showed he had actually done was wide enough to be disqualifying. A sniper who cannot accurately assess his own performance in the field is a liability in ways that no amount of raw skill can offset. He came to find Emily that evening. She was writing in her journal. He sat down across from her and said nothing for almost a full minute. You're going to make it, he said finally. She looked at him. I don't say that easy, he said. I don't say it to people I like usually because it creates the wrong mindset. But you, he stopped. Tried again. The thing you do, the thing where you know exactly what you did and why every single shot, even the corrections. I've never seen that in someone who hasn't been doing this for 15 years, he paused. Where did you get that? My grandfather, she said. He nodded slowly. I was wrong, he said, about Kestrel, about fast tracking, about what you were. You were doing what people do. Oh, she said. You saw the category before you saw the person. He was quiet. That's a generous way to put it, he said. It's an accurate way to put it, she said. I don't need it to be more than that. He looked at her for a long moment. Good luck, Carter, he said. Good luck, Kowalski, she said. He left. She went back to her journal. The full 12-week course began. She did not keep account of days the way she had at Kestrel. There was no need for account here. Every day was its own complete thing, its own set of demands, its own failures and corrections, its own incremental building of something that felt less like learning and more like excavation, like the course was removing everything that wasn't the thing she was supposed to be, rather than adding anything new. Briggs pushed her harder than he pushed anyone else. She understood why. When you fast-track someone, you are making a claim. The only way to validate the claim is to test it past the point of comfort, past the point of reasonable expectation, into the territory where what a person is made of becomes the only relevant variable. He was not doing it to break her. He was doing it because that was what she deserved, the full weight of the standard, not a modified version of it, not a version adjusted for the circumstances of her path here. She gave him everything he asked for. She gave him more. At week 8, during a night field evolution that required a sustained observation period of 6 hours, followed by a sequence of precision engagements at ranges between 600 and 1,100 yards, Emily broke a record. She did not know she had broken it. She was focused on the work, the win, the calculation, the breath, the moment, the next moment after that. She finished the evolution, logged her data, cleaned her rifle, ate her ration, and went to sleep. Briggs told her in the morning. He sat across from her at the assessment table with the evolution data in front of him and said, 1,104 yards, night conditions, wind variable at 9 to 14 knots, unsupported. She looked at him. That's the course record, he said. Previous record was 987, stood for 6 years. She looked at the data. My wind call on shots 3 and 4 was late, she said. I was carrying the previous reading 2 seconds too long. I corrected, but I should have caught the variable earlier. Briggs looked at her. He looked at her the way her grandfather had looked at her when she was 16 and hit the 1,000-yard target, the look of someone encountering a level of self-assessment that surprises them even when they expected something impressive. You just broke a 6-year course record, he said, and your response is to tell me what you did wrong. I know what I did right, she said. What I did right will repeat itself. What I did wrong needs to be fixed. He was quiet for a moment. Walter Carter, he said. Yes, Gunny, she said. Everything about you is Walter Carter, he said. She looked at him. Not everything, she said. He's better at chess. Briggs laughed. It was genuine and sudden, the same kind of surprise laugh that Whitfield had produced on the radio at Kestrel, and she filed it in the same place, the record of moments when the person in front of her had been caught off guard by something human in a hard place. She liked those moments. She had collected 367 mornings of their absence. She knew their value. Week 11 brought the final major evaluation, and it brought something else. It brought observers. 3 men she did not recognize in civilian clothes, sitting in the observation position behind the cadre table during the long-range field evolution. They had the particular stillness of people who were accustomed to watching things and not being watched in return, and they had cleared their schedule to be here specifically, which Briggs had not explained and which Emily had noted and filed. She performed the evolution. She did not change anything because of the observers. She shot the same way she always shot, fully present in each moment, the calculation clean and complete, before the trigger broke the data logged with the same precision after. She finished the evolution and returned to the assembly point and cleaned her rifle and did not look at the observers. After the evaluation, Briggs called her aside. The 3 men in the observation position, he said. I saw them, Gunny. DevGru selection board, and he said, they came specifically to evaluate your final evolutions. She held his gaze. DevGru, SEAL Team 6's development group, the highest operational tier in the American Special Operations structure, the place where the most demanding missions went to the most capable people without exception, without politics, without the institutional friction that had defined every stage of Emily Carter's military life up to this point. They've been following your progress since week 2, Briggs said, since Whitfield flagged the file. She said nothing. You're going to graduate, he said. Top of the class. That's not an opinion, it's a data statement. You've been top of every metric since day 8. He paused. What happens after graduation is going to be a conversation that you will have choices in. Real choices. More than most people get. He looked at her directly. I want you to be ready for that. She looked back at him. Gunny, she said. I've been ready for 4 years. He nodded once. I know, he said. I'm telling you anyway. She graduated on a Thursday morning in front of a small assembled group that included Briggs and his cadre. The 3 DevGru observers, 2 officers from JSOC who had driven up from San Diego, and 1 other person who was standing in the back of the assembly area in civilian clothes with his hands in the pockets of a jacket that was too light for the coastal morning. She saw him when she turned after receiving her qualification certificate. Walter Carter was 71 years old. He was lean and weathered and stood with the specific upright carriage of a man whose body remembered what discipline felt like from the inside. His blue eyes had not changed at all. They were looking at her across the assembly area with the same expression they had always held, steady and clear, and completely present, the eyes of a man who has learned to see the thing in front of him without the interference of what he expects or hopes or fears to see. She had not told him she was graduating today. He had come anyway. She crossed the assembly area. She stopped in front of him. He looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the qualification certificate in her hands. He looked at her face. Ouch, she said. Reeves called me, he said, in last week. Told me the date. He paused. He said he was the second call. He wanted to make sure someone who should have been the first call knew to be here. She held the certificate. She looked at her grandfather. She thought about a kitchen table in Montana and a rifle too large for her hands, and a voice that told her, without softening it, without making it smaller than it was, that the moment would come when she would be the only one who saw clearly, and when that moment came, she would have to trust what she knew. She had trusted what she knew. She had trusted it at Kestrel in the dark. She had trusted it in front of Dolan when it would have been easier to be quiet. She had trusted it through 11 months of invisibility and 367 mornings, and every shot on the roof and every day inside these wire when the pressure was designed specifically to find the place where her trust in herself would break. It had not broken. Top of the class, she said. He nodded. Course record at 11 weeks, she said. 1,104 yards. He was quiet for a moment. Night conditions, he said. Variable wind 9 to 14, she said. He absorbed that. My wind call was late on shots 3 and 4, she said. And Walter Carter smiled. It was not a large smile. It was the small, specific smile of a man who has received the exact answer that confirms everything he has spent years believing. Fix it, he said. I will, she said. He opened his arms. She stepped into them. He held her the way he had held her after hard things her entire life, not gently, not like something fragile, but solidly, the grip of a man who respects the person he is holding enough to hold them with full strength. She held him back the same way. They stood like that for a moment in the coastal morning with the DevGru observers watching from a distance and Briggs looking deliberately in another direction, and the qualification certificate pressed between them. I'm proud of you, he said. She did not say anything. She did not need to. She had waited a long time to stand in this particular place, and she wanted to feel the full weight of it before it became the past, and she moved on to the next thing. Her grandfather had taught her that too, that achievements belong to the moment they occur, and the only way to honor them is to be fully present inside them before the work continues. She was fully present. Then she stepped back. She looked at him. Reeves said to tell you something, she said. What? He said your granddaughter is better, she said. Walter Carter looked at her. His blue eyes held something she had not seen in them before, not often anyway. Not often enough to have cataloged it the way she cataloged everything else. Something that was pride but was also more than pride. Something that looked like the satisfaction of a man who has spent his life building something true and has just watched it become more than he built. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he's right, Walter said. You are. 3 weeks after graduation, the DevGru offer came through formally. It came with a call sign. The paperwork listed it in the operational section 3 lines down from her name and rank and qualification status, in the same plain font as everything else, as if it were an administrative detail, rather than the final transformation of something that had started with a little girl too small for a rifle in a field in Montana. Call sign Ghost. She read it once, she closed the file. She picked up her phone, she called her grandfather. Ghost, she said when he answered. A pause. Good, he said. They finally named the thing they couldn't see. She thought about every morning she had woken before anyone else in a dark barracks and started coffee for people who didn't know her name. She thought about 367 marks inside a footlocker. She thought about the first shot that missed and the second shot that didn't, and the 3 seconds in between when the whole weight of everything had rested on the choice she made alone in the dark. She thought about Marcus Webb saying her name for the first time like it was something worth saying. She thought about Danny Okafor checking her wrist. She thought about Reeves reading from a page he had memorized, and Dolan standing at the serving counter with his hands flat on the surface and the particular face of a man doing the hardest work there is. She thought about the mountains. She thought about how they had watched everything and said nothing, and how that was all right because she had watched everything too, and now it was time to stop watching and start moving into the operational world that had finally opened its door and was holding it. Ghost, she said again quietly, tasting the word. The girl no one had seen had become the thing that couldn't be caught. The cook who was never watched had become the weapon no one saw coming. And somewhere in every quiet person who has ever been told they don't belong, who has ever been looked through instead of looked at, who has ever carried their full strength in silence, while the world around them mistook silence for absence, somewhere in all of them, Emily Carter's story landed like a second shot. Clean, certain, exactly where it was always going to go.